We've done nothing wrong, and we need to go home. We wake up every morning terrified.
Hostage diplomacy and Huawei. Do you still think that Huawei, the big telecommunications company, and the Chinese government are not linked? If you still think this way, think again. What a surprise! Princess Meng, as they call her, the CFO of Huawei that was arrested and detained in Canada in order to extradite to the USA, because she defrauded a bank, and she's even written and signed documents to admit that's why she was released. She admitted wrongdoing. It's there. It's in writing. That was part of her release. As soon as she is released, all of a sudden, the two Canadians that were arbitrarily detained and accused of being spies were released too. Not only that, but two Americans that have been exit banned and stuck in China now for 3 years.
We've done nothing wrong, and we need to go home. We wake up every morning terrified.
The 27-year-old American who works for a New York consulting firm and her brother Victor, a 19-year-old Georgetown undergrad, are desperate to return home to the U.S. But their lawyer, David Pressman, says Chinese authorities won't let them leave the country. So what happens when Cynthia and Victor try to go to the airport and get on a plane back home?
Each time when they present themselves at the border, they are taken to a room and then they are ultimately told that they're not allowed to leave. Victor barely understands the language. I mean, it's bewildering, it's difficult, it's stressful.
The siblings are stuck in China under what is known as an exit ban, a tactic used by Beijing that allows foreigners to move around the country but prevents them from leaving it. Even though the Liu siblings are not accused of wrongdoing, exit bans can last days or years.
We feel trapped. We live with constant distress because this is not our home and we're not here by choice.
But their estranged father, Liu Changming, happens to be one of China's most wanted fugitives. A former executive at a state-owned bank, Liu is linked to a $1.4 billion fraud case and fled the country in 2007.
The interest of the Chinese authorities in Victor and Cynthia is purely to use Victor and Cynthia to try and get this guy to return to China.
They're bait.
They're a form of human bait.
We're also released. Well, let's talk about this for a little bit, guys. First of all, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the story, maybe you're not a China watcher or something, it's pretty straightforward. Huawei, as we all know, is a massive telecommunications company. They make phones, telecommunications equipment, and various other electronics. And their products have spread around the world. They are very interconnected with the Chinese government, and because of this, security concerns started to appear around the place. Experts, technical experts, people that are in the know like myself, and anyone who's into cybersecurity and so on, have been monitoring and taking a close look at Huawei products. They built themselves off of IP theft, and they stole a bunch of stuff from Nortel, actually caused Nortel to go under. There's a whole history, you can look it up, that's not what we're talking about here, but basically people were starting to notice backdoors in the Huawei devices, and also that they were communicating to servers in China, etc. You can look it all up, there's quite a lot of substantial evidence. So the governments around the world were like, hang on a second here, we better take a closer look at this Huawei equipment because it looks like it may be a security risk, a national security risk in various different countries. And so people started to certain governments started to ban the sale of Huawei equipment, at least to government offices and things like that. Without getting into the nitty-gritty of the case, Meng Wanzhou basically misrepresented to a bank in Hong Kong that she was not dealing directly, or Huawei was not dealing directly with Iran, circumventing certain sanctions, US sanctions, which could get the bank into trouble. And they believed her story. She put a presentation there and all that. She actually was fraudulent with the bank. And that's why she was detained in Canada. And she's been on house arrest there for about 3 years. I have to tell you that it hasn't been terrible for her. She's been able to live in her 2 mansions that she has in Canada, been able to move freely between them, also able to go out shopping and do whatever she wants. She just has to wear an ankle bracelet and had to have security guards with her every time she went out. So it's not like she was being kept in a prison cell like all the hostages that China took. Anyway, This was dragging on for a very long time, as we all know, this extradition process. Her lawyers were always trying to delay it or get it thrown out, and it just wasn't being thrown out. It wasn't getting to a point where anyone was really satisfied. And of course, in retaliation for Canada, and this, you can try to say it's not connected. The Chinese government has been trying to say forever that the two things are not connected. But of course they're connected, because actions speak louder than words. When she signed that agreement, they allowed her to go back to China. And guess what? At the exact same time, hours apart, they allowed the two Michaels to be sent back to Canada. Even though both of these Michaels had been accused of being spies, and my acquaintance, the guy I know personally, Michael Spavor, had already been given his sentence, a very lengthy sentence. All of a sudden, they're allowed to leave. I guess China doesn't care that much about their national security, though, if they're just willing to let spies go on a whim like that. It's obvious from the get-go this was hostage diplomacy. They only took those Canadians in to put pressure on Canada to release Meng Wanzhou. Now, on top of that, two siblings that went to China to visit family were exit banned and not allowed to leave. Now, the story behind this is that their father is actually a corrupt. He made this big bank fraud thing. It's kind of interesting how it's kind of connected to bank fraud anyway. The biggest bank fraud in China, he fled to the States, and all of his family was already in the States. They call people like him a naked official. And this is quite common in China when you have a government official ends up sending all of his family overseas to go study overseas, his children, his wife will go overseas, he'll buy property overseas, send all his assets overseas, and it's only him left in China, busy either doing his fraudulent government bribe business or whatever. In this case, it was a fraudulent bank thing. Took a whole lot of money and fled. So this is how the Communist Party works, is they work like a mafia. They want to get to you, they go through family. So his two children went to go visit relatives in China, and they weren't allowed to leave. They weren't detained, but they were exit banned. They just weren't allowed to leave, and they've been stuck in China for 3 years. Surprise, surprise, Meng Wanzhou goes back to China. Suddenly they're allowed to leave at the same time too. Hostage diplomacy. So back onto the whole Huawei thing. China has been trying for the longest time to say that the arrest of the two Michaels has nothing to do with the Huawei Meng case. Okay? They've also been trying to say that Huawei is not linked to the government. But answer me this then. Why is it that a Huawei executive like Meng gets into legal trouble abroad because she actually did do something wrong, which she's admitted and signed herself, gets into legal trouble abroad, and the Chinese government, the CCP, arrests Canadian citizens and puts exit bans on American citizens? Why does the government act on behalf of Huawei to try and pressure Canada and the US to release a Huawei executive if they weren't obviously linked? Not only that, the huge amount of press and blustering by politicians, Chinese media outlets, attacking Canada for what they're doing to their Princess Meng, who's just an executive of Huawei. If it was a private company, why would they care so much, right? Why is it that when she arrived back in China, in Shenzhen, city where I used to live, they roll out a red carpet. They put her name, welcome back, Meng Wanzhou, Meng Nisheng, or Miss Meng, on the frickin' skyscrapers all around the city. National coverage, it's the biggest thing. She's got a hero's welcome. She's given a wreath of flowers and allowed to walk on this red carpet. I mean, if you cannot see a connection between the government and Huawei at this point, you're blind. So, these security concerns over Huawei are legitimate because it shows you that the government and Huawei are intertwined, inseparable. The fact that the government would go out on a limb and create all this political mess and do everything that they've been doing in order to get her out shows you how important a company executive is to them. Now, this goes for all Chinese companies, by the way. Think of all Chinese companies, big Chinese companies, small Chinese companies, doesn't matter. Tencent, Alibaba, you name it. They are all intertwined and beholden to the Chinese government. When the Chinese government says jump, they say how high. It's all interconnected through guanxi connections, government connections, bribes, you name it, everything. It's all part of the same thing. All of these companies must do what the Chinese government says. The Chinese government has a presence within all of the companies, and due to Guanxi connections and so on, you'll probably find that most of the people running these companies are part of the government anyway, or very deeply connected with the government. So when you look at a situation like this, where China, even in its state media, has put out that Canada should draw lessons from the Huawei executive case, I mean, sure, Canada and the rest of the world should draw lessons from the Huawei executive case. And the lessons they should learn is that China will arbitrarily take hostages if a Chinese rich person breaks the law overseas. That's it. At the end of the day, the lesson is, it doesn't matter when it comes to law. China will arbitrarily make things up and arbitrarily detain and kidnap people if it suits their political purposes. And the rest of the world allows China to get away with this and encourages them to continue. I don't know about you guys, but I personally am not going to be flying into China or any China-friendly country anytime soon. If for some reason the CCP decides that they don't like you or they don't like your country, you can become a target too. This has been talked about various times, and we've seen it in action here now with the Huawei case. I, for one, am incredibly happy that the two Michaels have made their way home to Canada. It made my entire year to hear this news. You guys have been through a hell of a lot. And unlike cushy mansion living like Meng, you guys were actually in detention centers. And, you didn't actually do anything wrong. Unlike, self-admittedly, Meng Wanzhou did. Finally, you're back. You're out of the clutches. But it's awful that this kind of situation should arise in the first place. And unfortunately, again, if you look at the arrogant way that the Chinese press is blustering on about how Canada needs to learn lessons from this, etc., all that's happened now is that they've been encouraged to do this again in the future. And I think the world needs to get together and figure out a way to prevent this from happening in the future. China should not be allowed to arbitrarily take hostages just to suit their political goals. And you can say what you want and pretend that the two things are not related, but you know at the end of the day that's a bunch of horse shit, okay? The day that Meng gets released, the two Canadians get released, and the two Americans get released. Of course it was part of a plea bargain, a deal. It was a big thing, and it's nonsense. This whole thing about negotiating, not negotiating with terrorists, well, apparently we negotiate with China. I must add, before we finish this off, that the Chinese media is not reporting on the part where she signed that she had done something wrong, where she admitted that she had done something wrong. That's not in the news. What's in the news is that she pled not guilty because she was given an opportunity to plead not guilty to charges after she had signed that she admitted wrongdoing, which she did. And it's in black and white. You can see it over here. So, once again, we see how the Chinese Communist Party shapes the narrative. It whips up nationalist fervor, uses mafia thug tactics to pressure other countries and people into doing what they want. Isn't it time we all stopped bending and accepting this nonsense? Anyway, guys, until next time, unlike Meng Wanzhou and Huawei and all the other nonsense like that, stay awesome.